Jump into the time
Imagine
machine.
yourselves. Yeah, jump into the time machine. Imagine yourselves at the top of the world. You're a household name everywhere. You're the #1 video game developer in the world. Everybody wants to be you. Obviously, I mean, video games. Come on. And then you go and you almost lose it all. This is what almost happened to Nintendo back in the late 90s, at close to the turn of the century, when everybody started making leaps to the next generation of consoles after the Super Nintendo, with the Nintendo 64 coming out and with the PlayStation. And specifically, I want to talk about how Final Fantasy and Squaresoft.
Okay. The Super Mario RPG gets.
Sorry, it looked like I was dropping. No. Surprisingly, Super Mario RPG.
Huh. The best Final Fantasy game, by the way. The #1 Final Fantasy, Super Mario RPG. Who would agree?
I would agree. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII was supposed to come out for the... Well, it wasn't really supposed to come out for the Nintendo 64. It's one of those things that everybody says, but wasn't exactly true.
Okay.
So there are those tech demos that you see around with the Final Fantasy VI characters in 3D, and that was supposedly like the what Square Enix was working on originally. But in reality, that was a tech demo that they put together on their own, because Nintendo wouldn't throw out developer kits to anybody.
Okay.
So they had to kind of work on their own, and then they were going to look at reducing it, compacting it, compressing it to fit on their hardware and stuff like that, once they got an idea of what the specs were and everything like that. And so that was the first big blunder for Nintendo, was they were putting out this new hardware, but they weren't giving anybody development kits, so nobody knew what they could do with it.
Interesting.
And that's a big issue when you're making a game and your competitors are saying, hey, here's what we have, here's our development kit, go ahead and get started. Like, how are you supposed to get any games put on?
So what was... Do we know what their reasoning was behind it?
They're kind of like Apple in a lot of ways. Apple doesn't like to give people resources unless they absolutely have to. They don't like to reveal anything about their products. When you do developing for them, you have to sign non-disclosure agreements on like everything.
Right.
It's nuts. So Nintendo doesn't like to give away their secrets, essentially. And they've always been like this, always been very reserved and closed off, closely guarded.
Right. So they were just trying to keep everything proprietary.
Yeah, they were trying to keep everything proprietary, very secret. They've never wanted to rely on third-party developers, especially back then. Their thought process was, if you want to develop for us, that's great, but we don't need you. Which, I mean, come on, that's a pretty shitty attitude to have.
Absolutely. Can confirm.
And actually, this article I was reading kind of went over that too. The only thing I want to highlight is Hiroshi Kawai from Square was told literally by Nintendo, if you're leaving us, never come back.
Interesting.
It's like, damn, dude.
So that's why we still don't have Geno in Smash.
I guess they've kind of made amends.
To a degree, it seems like, yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of different people now in each company, so those kind of tensions kind of run their course. But it's not like Nintendo hasn't shot themselves in the foot before or after that either. They've long been accused of unfair business practices, running virtual monopolies, which I guess is kind of what put them on top of the world in the first place. They did a lot of price fixing. They forced retailers to sell games at specific prices instead of having a suggested price. This was back in the NES era. They actually had to pay out to 39 states in a lawsuit settlement.
Wow.
But even shadier, they didn't have to pay that out of pocket. Instead, the courts let them give everybody involved a $5 coupon. Which means they had to go out and spend more money to use that coupon.
Right.
So it just benefited them in the end.
Right.
So I guess it's not really them shooting themselves in the foot at that point. It's them pulling the wool over everybody's eyes and being the biggest wolf.
Yeah, a little magic trick. Them and Richard Loud would get along.
Yeah.
A lot. Interesting.
It was a good trick by them. But very, very shitty, very shady. This is why I'm wearing the shades, by the way, because we're talking about shady business. So this also isn't the only shady thing they've done. A lot of people are criticizing them more recently about their eShop stuff. I mean, they're pulling games off of the eShops for the Wii and the Wii U.
Mm-hmm.
There are games you can only get on one eShop or the other. The fact that you have to buy them on the Wii eShop and then buy them again on the Wii U eShop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why they're doing the retro emulation stuff on the Switch so much differently, so they don't get that much criticism anymore.
Right. You've got them stopping.
Just imagine having to buy.
They're also doing the whole limited,
Sorry,
the limited print for All-Stars.
The Mario 3D All-Stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not so much the limited print, but the fact that it's coming off the eShop as well.
Yes.
I know people are upset about that.
Not only is it time gated to acquire, it has a lifespan.
Right.
A virtual lifespan.
Wait. It'll stop working? No. I thought if you download it, you'll be good.
Is it? I thought they said it was only... I don't know. The way I heard it implied that it was only going to be available to work for a certain point.
Well, that's fucked then.
Well, what I mean is, what comes after the Switch? Are they going to port it to the next system?
Oh, right. Gotcha. Right, correct. I get you. And then, I know Mario 35 is also not going to be playable after.
Yeah, for some reason I thought you were talking about Mario 35. That's why I got confused. Yeah, so they've just been doing all kinds of stuff. Hey, Gypsy, how's it going? But yeah, imagine buying the cart for a game, then buying it on the Wii eShop, then having to buy it on the Wii U eShop.
Right.
And then having to buy it on the Switch eShop if it came to that. Like, how many times can you make people buy your games just because they want to have them? And yeah, you can just say, well, don't buy the game because you already own it. But a lot of people aren't like that. They want to have it there, so they'll find a way to have it.
Right. I think that's the big problem is people don't vote with their wallet enough with these developers.
Yeah. Yes.
Kind of the way EA gets away with all their...
It's also very similar to, with like microtransaction things. A lot of people can't really control themselves that well, and at some point you're just taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
That mental issue with them.
Yeah, you got EA with all their microtransactions. WoW just released a microtransaction today, actually, that everyone's upset about.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and it's tied to like 6 months worth of game time or something. People are upset about that.
We'll have to look at that soon. Blizzard would be another good company to
dive into
look over at some point.
Yeah. The downfall, I
and
suppose.
EA for that matter. Yeah. So that's the shady Nintendo business practices kind of out of the way. But really, I wanted to talk about just how close we were to having Final Fantasy VII on the N64 and how different it would have been. But yeah, I guess the main issue with Final Fantasy VII specifically was disk space. Although it's not unfeasible to think that at a certain point they wouldn't have been able to do it. Because apparently, from what I was reading, if you look at what's actually on the 3 Final Fantasy VII discs, it's the game data is all the same all the way through, except for the final boss's attacks and all the stuff with the final boss. I won't spoil it in case somebody hasn't been alive for
the
last
unless
20
they haven't
years.
played it. So
yeah,
that's the only thing that's not included on all 3 discs. That's only included on the 4th disc, I'm assuming, or 3rd disc. 3rd, yeah.
The 3rd disc has the boss abilities and stuff. That's the only thing that gameplay is concerned with. The only other difference between the discs is the FMVs. So it's all audio and movie data that's taking up the space, which could have been compressed further, especially with better compression methods coming out.
Right.
So the big issue really was that Final Fantasy VII came out at the beginning of the N64's life cycle, where cartridge sizes started out at like 4 megs. They ended at about 64 megs. So that's like 16 times the size. Plus, we had Resident Evil 2 compressed down to N64, which was one of the better ports from what I understand. And that went from like 750 megs to 76.
Uh-huh.
Or no, even less than that, because it fit on a cartridge. It fit on a single cartridge. So that's more than 10 times the compression. Like,
Getcha.
It's feasible to think Final Fantasy VII would have been able to accomplish it.
Would have been able to fit on a card,
after a certain
right?
point. Yeah. But at the time, to do what Sony wanted, or sorry, not Sony, but what Square wanted to do with their game, cartridges were definitely not a feasible option. They kept looking at what they wanted to do and saying, okay, well, we want these full motion videos and we want to be able to sometimes tie the gameplay into them. And you see that they accomplished that pretty well in Final Fantasy VII if you played it. There were definitely times when like the camera starts panning out or panning over, and you still have the character models in there, but you're in a full motion video at the same time.
First scene.
You can still move your character around. Yeah. And it's really awesome, to be honest. It's a really big leap in technology.
Do you think
and that just would not have been able to get done?
Do you think we'd be where we are today in terms of the Final Fantasy series if it was released on Nintendo?
I honestly think it would have taken a drastically different turn. I think they had a very specific vision for Final Fantasy VII to begin with.
Right.
And I think they would have made that happen regardless. So I don't think we would have gotten a much different game. But there is the chance that Final Fantasy VII could have ended up a 2D game instead.
Huh.
And it's kind of interesting to think about how the storytelling in Final Fantasy VII would be different in a 2D setting, like Final Fantasy IV or Final Fantasy VI. I think it would have been arguably worse. It wouldn't have been nearly as immersive, and I think that's one of Final Fantasy VII's biggest qualities, is just how immersive it is. Even though you're playing magic-infused people who can shoot bullets from their gun arms and all kinds of other wild fantasy stuff.
Summon big, huge monsters.
Yeah, summon gigantic monsters. You still get immersed. It's got enough ties to like realism, like the whole Shinra building.
Absolutely.
Like the Shinra stuff really hit home with me. I loved that.
Shinra, yeah.
You're installing PUBG. Otter, please, no.
Shinra, yeah. I mean, Final Fantasy VII story in particular is fantastic. It really is. It's very memorable. Definitely holds a huge part in terms of my childhood. I'm trying not to go too much in depth because I don't want to bump up Omaru's ego and
Yeah, his ego.
But it is a great game.
I've only probably spent about half as much time with Final Fantasy VII as I have with
6.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII ended up being one of the biggest launch titles, one of the biggest releases that we've ever seen to this day. It's been ported countless times now. And you kind of have to feel like Nintendo really has to regret that decision to not go with CD-based peripherals and instead stuck to cartridge-based, because they had the option to.
Right.
They had the technology. Hell, the N64 actually has a disk drive add-on. So they clearly saw their mistake and tried to rectify
who was developing
that? Great question.
Wasn't it like Philips or something?
I think it might have been Philips. They had a contract with Philips in the past as well, so they probably were on good terms. I believe Philips was responsible for the... Who was it?
Alps Electric.
Ah. I don't recognize them.
No, me neither.
I'm pretty sure Philips was the people responsible for their internet capabilities on the Super Nintendo. I don't know if you've looked into that at all.
Yeah, what was that called? The
I can't remember the name of it anymore. But it was pretty neat how they had a specific Zelda game and the objectives changed based on the day, and it was limited play.
Yeah,
kind of sad we'll never see something like that again.
Fuck, what was it called?
I did hear that some people plan to emulate it.
It went through like FM or something, didn't it? It was like weird.
It was very weird. Yeah. We can look into that some other time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't remember what it was called. I'm trying to Google stuff and I can't find it. That was a very interesting idea. I remember seeing someone playing the Zelda game or showing off what it was, at least. And like explaining it. Right. It was super weird.
But I guess with the N64, it might not have been the worst decision to stick with cartridges in the end. I mean, the console performed fine.
Right.
But man, having FF7 on there would have really catapulted things. And imagine the games that are on there already and how much they could have been improved with higher textures and higher polygon counts.
Absolutely. Hey, appreciate the alert, Tango. Absolutely.
But this guy brings up some good points too, which I wanted to kind of go over.
Sure.
You know, the biggest one I think is his first point. If the N64 had CDs instead, it wouldn't have been able to match the Saturn and the PS1 at launch at price point. That would have been huge.
Would have had to be...
It would have been more expensive. It would have been $50 to $100 more expensive, probably.
Gotcha.
That would have almost definitely ensured its
demise
removal, at least from the top, if not its complete demise. Yeah. Yeah, the texture cache was the actual limiting factor for the graphics, not really the memory size.
Okay.
Due to how compression works. Music and FMV stuff would have been way better. And you would have had better third-party support, of course.
Right.
They would have had better third-party support if they just weren't greedy in holding onto their development kits.
That's what it sounds like, right? Yeah, I mean, that's huge. Not, yeah.
Yeah. How are you supposed to get people to develop games for your system if you don't give them the tools to do it?
Exactly. Understandable. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Well, interesting.
That's pretty much it. It's sad that they kind of ruined their reputation and their relationship with Square doing that. But you can't blame Square for it, that's for sure. Square was just going with what they needed to make the game that they wanted.
Right.
And they gave Nintendo every opportunity to fix it too.
Nintendo
And in the end,
threaded
Nintendo
them.
wanted to. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.